We'll start off with just pointing out the consciousness part again, and the I am. And then I'll move on to seeking energy and what seeking energy is. I mean, if I call the absolute what I really like, it would be like aliveness, a live presence. That's I think my favourite words, but I do tend to change my mind a lot. But it's easier in a way for me to call it consciousness and the I am, because this is what other people call it, and it's a very complex subject, so it's easier to call it what other people call it. Actually, a lot of people call it awareness and the I am, but you know, I came from the Ramesh Balsaka school that's consciousness speaks and consciousness, so that's what I've ended up with. But a lot of people call consciousness the personal awareness, whereas I call the absolute, the big consciousness, just consciousness, and then the personal awareness, so the ability to move the human lens, your attention, so you can move your attention onto the wind, onto my voice, onto your feet, onto your belly button. That I call personal awareness. So right now, there is multiple things happening, but there's two things I'm going to focus in on. There is your personal awareness of the situation. And your personal awareness is the ability to move your attention and its thinking. So you can move your attention around the room and you can interpret what I say. So you have this ability to understand what I say. If I was speaking in French, the majority of people wouldn't be able to interpret it. They would be able to hear it was French, but they wouldn't be able to interpret it. So you've got this ability to put your focus onto me and to understand what I say on the human level. And I sort of lump that into personal awareness. And then you've also got something else happening, which is a recognition of that, a conscious recognition of the personal awareness. So right now, you are conscious of this room. You're conscious of the sound of my voice. You're conscious of the wind, of the sensation of the floor. You're conscious of this wall behind me, of the sofa, of the bell, of the drink, instantly. You do not need the personal awareness to interpret it. You're instantly conscious of what's happening. And that's no effort. You didn't wake up in the morning and be like, turn on consciousness, tick. The consciousness is just there. The personal awareness, there is the ability to sort of like drink a cup of coffee and turn it on better. Or have your breakfast and it gets turned on better. Whereas the conscious recognition is always there. It's even there in deep sleep, but we're not going to address deep sleep now because that's an incredibly complex subject. We're just going to talk about the waking time. And consciousness is there from the moment you wake up. You do not switch it on. You do not switch it off at night. It's just there. You do not have to think, hang on, let me be conscious of the room. You're just conscious of the room. Your personal awareness can be, let me put my personal awareness more into the room. So let me become, on the personal level, more aware of the room. So you put your attention, you put the ability to move your lens, your personal awareness, into the room. And sometimes when we're learning this subject, we practice with the personal awareness to become more personally aware. We put the personal awareness into the present moment. And a lot of teachers recommend that. And I would recommend it as a way to settle the personal awareness down, to settle the thinking mind down. But that personal awareness is not going to wake up to the big consciousness. It can't, because the big consciousness is prior to the personal awareness. The big consciousness is already aware of the personal awareness and cannot be more conscious of the personal awareness. You can't practice consciousness more. You can't make consciousness more conscious. It's conscious. Right now, there is consciousness of this room happening. You can practice on the personal awareness level to put your personal awareness more into the present moment than into the thinking timeline. And that I would recommend. But ultimately, you have to understand that the personal awareness is a functioning and isn't actually somebody's that someone owns, and it isn't your free will to do that. Like, free will is something that we've all agreed to have, well, not agreed to have, but we've all named, and we all assume that's real and that's reality, that we have free will. But that's a very questionable thing. Again, we can talk about that another time, because that's a very complicated subject. Like, how do we choose our thinking? How do we choose our personal awareness? How do we choose our conditioning? So free will is very complicated. What is free will? But that we certainly have the appearance of free will. So it feels like we can move our attention into the present moment. Whether it actually is free will, we'll talk about that another time. But we have the appearance of free will. So we can appear to be lost in thought, and then we move our attention back to now, back to what's happening. We can have the appearance of free will when we have the presentation of, say, going to sleep or staying awake and watching TV. There's an appearance there of making a choice. So on the human level, that practice can be very beneficial to settle the character down, to put the attention back in what's happening now. So back into the feeling body, into the chakra system, and back into this, like the sound of my voice, the sound of the wind. But notice that the big consciousness that's conscious of that person never needs to practice anything. It already is here. It already is conscious. It can't come more conscious. It's just that your focus on the human level is just in the personal awareness that can be lost in thought, that can be lost in the imagination. The consciousness, there is no sort of focus on that. The consciousness, the big consciousness, most people aren't even aware of that. They don't even have a language for that. They just think that there's somebody who has consciousness and is alive, and they exist inside of this body, and this person is alive, and they think, well, that's what I've been told. I have a soul and I exist inside here, even though they can't prove it, and that doesn't really make sense. They're like, yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm a soul, and I'm alive, but I don't really know what that is, to be alive. In fact, I won't even think about that. We'll just think about gathering some more things, and we won't think about what it is to be alive. Which again isn't wrong. Gathering more things has a purpose to an extent. It's just the different manifestations in this reality. So back to this consciousness and this personal awareness. So this consciousness doesn't need to be more conscious. You don't need to practice that. That's here. It's happening. It's here all the time. You've always been conscious since the moment you were born, even prior to when you were born, but you can't remember that, so we'll just go from the moment you were born. There has always been consciousness. That's been happening. You never needed to invest money in that, to put effort into it. It's happening. There's also something else that's happening, is this sense of I am, this sense of being alive. You didn't need to put any effort into that either. You had that sense of being alive when you were 2 years old, 1 year old, 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. You've always had this sense of being, this sense of existence, and this consciousness, this recognition of what's happening. Now in that, The you, who you think you are, has come and gone and changed and developed, changed its ideas, changed its appearance, changed what it likes, what it doesn't like, gained memories. But that comes and goes. When you're eating your dinner, you're not really aware of your memories and your looks and your body. As you can see, I particularly like my food. That's why it comes up a lot. The dinner is a very enjoyable time. So when you're riding your bicycle, when you're laughing, everything about you on the human level disappears. You're just totally involved in it. But what remains is the big consciousness, the recognition that it's happening, and the sense of existence, that sense of being. That's still there, even though you've forgotten who you are in that moment of laughing. You don't know that you're 25 years old or having a terrible day or the youngest of 5 children, not good enough, pretty, ugly, tall, short. You don't know any of that. You're just laughing. And what is always there in every moment is the big consciousness and the I am. But on the human level, we're convinced that we are this person that comes and goes. We are somebody that is a story, that is a body, that is a particular look, that is your ideas, your belief systems, your age, your financial situation, your job. But that's something that's always changing and being updated. So what humans believe themselves to be is something that's moving, something that's always changing. And that can be very uncomfortable, to be something that's always changing. Because how do you know who you are if you're always changing? If you're always different in most circumstances and you're always progressing and updating, then what can you rely on? How can you rely on yourself to be the same in the next situation? And also, that also means that you were born and that you will die. That at one point, that character and that body will disappear, which is mentally very distressing to you. Even if you're not conscious of it, there is a paranoia about dying in most people. A paranoia that one day you will not exist and the world will carry on existing without you. That's terrifying, because what that implies is that you'll be abandoned and rejected by life. At some point, you're going to be kicked out of life, like being kicked out of your social circumstances or being kicked out of your home, being kicked out from your lover. But this isn't just those things, this is the whole entire life. Life is going to exist without you on the human level. And that's mentally distressing. So what happens is you base your whole life on trying to avoid that. You're not conscious of it, but it's like the information goes in, okay, I'm alive, I exist, I've got to try and keep myself alive and keep all my things with me, keep a solid personality, keep my friends, keep my situation, keep someone to look after me if I get sick, keep this, keep that. And that's going to create a certain amount of stress, because one thing we can be sure of in this life is that it always changes. That nothing stays the same. So it's like you're going to be trying to grab onto water, you're going to be trying to catch water in your hands or catch water in a net. You're like trying to keep everything the same, trying to keep this person alive, this relationship okay, this da-da-da. And then that's going to build stress over time. So what you're going to be seeking for is stability, safety, no, we can't say. Yes, that word. To stay the same. You're going to be seeking for always having a good reputation, money, a household, lovers, friends. This is a lot of things to keep the same. Now, if we think about my beautiful dog, Khaleesi, She doesn't have any of that. She doesn't even know she's alive and that she's going to die. She doesn't know that she's incredibly good looking, so she doesn't have the fear of losing her beautiful black coat and beautiful, beautiful cute face and her Thai, like this Thai makeup eyes she's got. She doesn't know any of that. She doesn't know if she fights with another dog that she'll be in a lot of trouble. Well, she knows it with me, but not in the greater society. She doesn't know these things. So therefore, she has a very unstressful life. To her, she just is in every moment and she just responds. She's aware that she can annoy the owner, which is me. So she tries her best not to annoy me and to do what I ask of her, but sometimes her instincts are too strong and then she comes back very afraid, like, I'm sorry. But apart from that, her life is stress-free. She's just here. We might call this very simplistic thinking, so we might think of her as an idiot. Apparently a dog has a brain the size of a walnut. I thought it was bigger than that. I gave her too much credit. So she's got the size of a walnut, but she's free. She doesn't worry about keeping her home. She doesn't worry about her finances, how many bones she's got hidden in the garden. She doesn't worry about any of that. In every moment is fresh. She doesn't worry about being bored. She can experience boredness, but to her, that's just lots of energy, so she just starts running around the house and destroying things. But she doesn't worry. She doesn't think, I'm bored, life is such a bitch. It's given me nothing to do. She's just like, boom. She kind of goes crazy when she's bored, like a Tasmanian devil. But she doesn't even feel bad about that, unless I tell her off, and then she's like, oh. But I tend not to. I just let her go wild. So you can understand that animals are free. To me, animals are perfectly enlightened because they don't have the ability to think of themselves in time. They don't have self-awareness. They don't know who they are, so they don't have to maintain who they are in their thoughts. So in every situation, she's absolutely 100% surrendered to that situation, no matter what it is, even if she doesn't like it. She's surrendered to it because she can't think about something better. She can't think of something else, so she's totally involved in what's happening. And it's wonderful to see. This is why we love animals and we love young children, because I open the door and she's excited by that. I open the door and go back in again and she's like, woohoo, here we are. And then I go again and she's like, yeah. She's totally involved in what's happening, 100%. And if you're totally involved in what's happening, it's like you're right next to that consciousness and that I am. And that consciousness and I am is totally free. It's like you've not left the consciousness and the I am. You're not dreaming in time. You're totally in being conscious and that sense of I am. Like when you're laughing, you completely forget yourself. There is just consciousness and I am. And that consciousness and I am is free. It's so free. So when you get what you want, when you listen to a beautiful piece of music, when you fall in love, when you're laughing, when you're having an orgasm, when you're eating, can't forget the food, you're totally involved in it. And so therefore you're right next to or in that I am and consciousness. You're not removed from it. You're not imagining yourself in time and imagining something better, imagining disaster. You're just in what's happening. So what happens to the human is that I think that this divide, this sense of self, starts at age 1 or 2. I've never had a child, but this is what other people have reported. My friend told me this really amazing story about both his children. he said that at about 1.5 years old, both of them did the same thing. And this seems to be when this sense of a self, sense of being someone, this personal awareness arises. And with that, the identification arises. So he said that both of his children did that they got a toy, and they were playing with the toy, and then suddenly they just threw the toy over their head. And then the toy was gone, and the child had no response. Didn't look behind, it didn't cry, it didn't giggle, it just was, the toy's gone, that's that. And it kept doing this repetitively. Get the toy and throw it over its head. Then eventually, the child threw the toy over the head, and it looked around and looked at the toy. And it did this repetitively. And looked and acknowledged that the toy was still there. That still existed. It didn't just disappear and that was it, gone forever. That the toy still existed when it looked around. And then it did the final stage, which was it threw the toy over the head, and then it started crying. And his assumption was that on the third stage, the child knew the toy still existed and was crying because it no longer had it. The toy existed in another place without it, and it cried because it didn't have that toy anymore. And this is the beginning of personal awareness, that you are aware, or you have awareness of who you are and who other things are. Khaleesi doesn't have this, my dog doesn't have this. She does know that if you... No, she doesn't. I've tested it. I've tested it with putting my hand under a rug. She can't recognize that it's my hand. She thinks it's something else. She's like... So I even try to show her it's my hand, and she still can't recognize that as soon as it goes under the rug, it's not my it's my hand. She's suddenly like, whoa, there is something there under the rug. I'm like, it's my hand, see? Whoa. So she can't recognize that and put this together in the timeline, whereas we can. But then our timeline gets even better and more complicated. So we can begin to imagine that a whole entire world exists out there when we don't exist. So we now can imagine that Australia exists or the moon exists. We don't have any proof of it, we just have this moment, but our imagination can imagine it exists. We can imagine that this room exists without us, which is horrifying to us. We're like, oh God, that something exists without us. So we can imagine that we die and life carries on without us. We can imagine all these things, whereas all other animals don't have this. So what this does is it begins to affect our emotional body. So if we begin to imagine that there's somebody out there that we really dislike, just now, if we start thinking about someone we really dislike, Khaleesi doesn't have this ability. She cannot imagine the neighbour's dog until she goes out in the garden and can smell the neighbour's dog. She can't sit in the house and begin to get angry about the neighbour's dog. She just can't do it. Whereas we can sit here and we can imagine our colleague and our body begins to have an emotional reaction. So we begin to have an emotion on something that does not exist, which is an amazing thing. This is amazing that life has created a being that can do this. But this can become quite overwhelming on the human level because we can imagine all types of things. We could imagine a nuclear disaster happening. So we're sitting here, we're all happy, and then suddenly in pops the imagination that there's a nuclear disaster and our body's like... Or we can imagine taking an aeroplane tomorrow and the aeroplane crashes. And we're like, oh God. We can also imagine positive things. We can imagine that tomorrow we're going to meet our true love, the most amazing lover of our life. And then we're like, We can imagine that we're going to win the lottery tomorrow and we're like, We can imagine we're going to get a new house or We're going to go to the beach. That somebody's going to see us. All types of positive things as well. But this imagination is a very amazing but dangerous avenue. Because what begins to happen is we begin to realize how wonderful it is to have positive imaginations. So we can be sitting here and nothing much is happening, so we're bored. And a child would just start running around and lying on the floor and doing lots of things and jumping. And a dog would start running around or barking. Whereas we'd just sit here, so we're bored, and we can start imagining something amazing. And we're like, and we can get addicted to that. That can be very addictive, to imagine amazing things. But the mind, it's like playing with a wolf. If you've ever played with a wolf before. You got to be careful because the wolf could just suddenly turn. Or a tiger, if you've ever played with a tiger before. The tiger can just suddenly turn. And this is the same with the imagination. So you can be having your paradise. You can be like lying on a beach in Thailand and sunbathing, and this perfect, beautiful partner just comes up to you and you're like, wow. And then you look up at the ocean and then suddenly a big tidal wave is coming and you're like, oh God. And your imagination has gone dark. And so then you get stressed by that, so you start putting pressure on yourself to have a positive imagination. But you can't rely on the imagination. But if you've spent 20, 30 years investing in this game of positive and negative imagination, then it's hard to control it. It's like an out-control beast. It's like you've given the imagination the control. You've put all your focus in the imagination. You've cut off from your body. Most people, by the time they're 30, they're absolutely unaware of the body unless they're in spirituality or healing. But if you're in regular society, you've just become a brain and two eyes and these fingertips when you're on a computer. That's all you are. So you've kind of given the control to a very amazingly wonderful genius and also what's his name? Lucifer. So you've given it to the saint and you've given it to Lucifer as well. And you can try your best to keep it in positive imagination, but again, it's like trying to juggle too much. Because no matter how much you try, you can't keep it in positive imagination all the time. The negative just comes in, it just pops in. Because the brain was never invented to stay positive. Our thinking, well, not the brain, but our thinking, if we look at it from an evolutionary point of view, our thinking evolved to fix problems. That's all it evolved for. If you don't believe me, watch The Jungle Book, and that will explain it. Or read The Jungle Book. And then you'll understand that the brain or the thinking mind, was created to fix problems. And if you've seen The Jungle Book, you'll understand why I say that, because Mowgli has this... Mowgli lives with the wolves and the other animals. And the other animals don't like him using his imagination. They see it as dangerous. But Mowgli's desperate to use his imagination to fix problems so he can see how the wolves and all the animals could live better and make their survival better. So he can use his imagination to imagine how to fix problems. But all the animals don't like him using his imagination because they think it's dangerous. And they think the animals think that humans can be evil because of this. But Mowgli can't help it. He just wants to use his imagination. And then I can't remember the story perfectly, so excuse me if I go off track, but I think that a baby elephant falls down a hole. And all the elephants can't get the baby elephant out of the hole, and if they don't get him out, he's going to die. But Mowgli can imagine to make a rope. None of the other animals can imagine to make a rope. And so Mowgli makes this rope secretly and puts the rope down there, and all the elephants pull out the baby elephant. So this is an amazing quality that we have. But what is our imagination for? Fixing problems. So if we overinvest in our imagination, what's it going to get obsessed with? Problems. It's like, so therefore, we're going to keep seeing problems everywhere. We can't keep staying on paradise because our mind imagines what problems can happen in paradise. It can imagine a tidal wave can come. It can imagine you can get stung by a hornet. It can imagine there's jellyfish, and it can imagine how to stop that happening. So when you put all this attention in the imagination, if your whole focus is just in thinking, you're just going to see problems all the time, which at first is okay. When you're a child, it's okay. But as you begin to progress, you're emotionally going to get more and more stressed because you're going to be fixating on problems and problem solving. And it's going to have an effect on your body. Thinking all the time is going to stress out your body. And the more that it stresses out your body, the more you're going to go into time and not want to feel what you feel. So you're going to then use your imagination more to try to escape from the discomfort of the body. And now, in society, one of our number one medications is antidepressants. And in Australia, I listened to research. It's not antidepressants because people are reporting being depressed. It's actually antidepressants because of physical ailments which they think come from stress, which is like backache, shoulder ache, neck ache. And so use antidepressants to relax you so your back relaxes. And the reason that is because the emotional body is getting all tied up by this fixation on problems. It's not that thinking is bad, thinking is amazing. It's just that thinking is a tool. You also see yourself in thinking. So can you think about yourself if you don't think about yourself? Now, what I mean is you. Like who you think you are, memories, qualities, age, time. Can you experience that without thinking? Or is you only found in thinking, in time? So right now, if you stop thinking, can you know yourself as who you believe yourself to be in that timeline? Or does that require an imagination and a thought? So if that requires an imagination and a thought, your mind is going to begin to see you as a problem as well. It can't help it. It's just going to begin to think, I'm a problem. I'm not good enough. I'm not clever enough. I'm not funny enough. It's not that it's bad. It's just what it does. If the mind walks into a room, it begins to think how to fix that room. Even if it's a really perfect room, it will still begin to see the problems of the room. In England, we are renowned, I think, worldwide for bad food, number one. Although English people aren't aware of this, so don't tell them. Except me, but that's because I've lived in Europe and Australia so long. So bad food, and then the number two, although I'm not sure if mainland Europeans know this, but the Australians certainly do. They call us in Australia whinging poms. We're called poms, I'm not sure why. I thought it was because of apples, but maybe not. So whinging poms. And I don't know if mainland Europeans know that the English moan a lot. We like to moan. We love to have a good moan. When I came back to England after 2 years of being away, the first thing I saw was not welcome to the UK or welcome to England. It was, do you have a complaint? And then I could see all the English people like, ooh. And off they are. Now they've changed the sign to something like, do you have suggestions? Like suggestions for improvement or something. It's still the first sign that all the English are like, ooh. And it's not that, well, I have lots of theories as to why the English complain a lot. And this might actually offend a lot of people. But it might be that the English in the past have overemphasis on thinking. Like, this is just my very basic view, and I'm sure people are going to be like, she's a racist, this is really bad to say. But because English was such good conquerors, and because they had such terrible weather, they might have had to think about how to improve their environment. And so they might have been a society that invested a lot in thinking. But I know that this can fit into very racist ideas of saying that northern countries are more intelligent than other countries. I don't mean that at all. But I do wonder why we moan so much. And because thinking is about fixing problems, I just think we've overinvested in thinking rather than environment and our bodies and our feelings. And we did have didn't have the best land, England. So we did have to think about ways to improve our land. Like, it rains a lot and it's cold. So we had to invent ways to keep ourselves warm and covered. I don't know why the English love to moan, but that was one theory I came up with. But I'm sure all societies do, but I've noticed it particularly in England. And it's only because you're invested in problem thinking. Like, if you looked at it the other way around, we have such amazing lives, but we don't invest in that thinking in our society. There is so many amazing things about our lives. Like, especially as Europeans. I think we're mostly Europeans. I think there's a few of us that aren't Europeans, but most of us are Europeans. I know, yeah, and I think there's a Russian as well, 2 Russians. So, but even Russia, I'm not sure about Russia actually, but America, I mean, maybe this is going to be racist. Oh, no, you're not. You're South America, actually. But maybe you came from Europe originally. But you kind of have a good standard of living. Even in Russia, I haven't been there and I'm not sure, but I think it's quite a good standard of living. We have so many positive things happening in our society. We have some negative things, but if we compare it to what we've come from, we've certainly improved. There is so many things throughout your day that you could be grateful for. But what I notice a lot of our society does is it focuses on what's bad. Not because anybody's bad, but because that's the nature of thinking. So often what happens in spiritual practice is we're taught to find gratitude of what we're grateful for, which at the end of the day is encouraging thinking. And I didn't come from that path so much. It just began to naturally happen the more I explored myself as I began to become more positive. But it's also an interesting thing to do is to, instead of focusing on your problems throughout your day, but not being dishonest with yourself, not being fake, like noticing what your body's saying and what it feels, but also seeing how many blessings there are. I mean, the fact that we get fed regularly is quite a blessing compared to many societies and compared to what we came from. And it's so easy getting food now. Like, we don't have to do that much for our food, and it's so tasty. And then what else have we got? We've got TV, we've got the internet. The internet is amazing. I'm sorry, I like TV as well and films. The internet is an amazing thing. Like, you can YouTube anything. I was even explaining, like, Andreas was asking me how I learned to do my hair, and I was like, well, in the olden days, I just kind of had to learn from my mother and work it out myself. And I was like, but now you can just YouTube it. How to make a bun on my head, how to comb my hair, how to put up shelves. I mean, this is really something. I mean, I'm blown away by the internet. Any problem you have, even an emotional problem, how to deal with anxiety. Oh. You can even go on Google and look all around the world. Like, you don't even have to leave your house. You can just look up what a gorilla's like, what a zebra is like. I do love the internet. I think it's an amazing invention. So, like here, how beautiful it is. Like everywhere you look here, it's so beautiful. What your mind could focus on is negative. It could find negative. It could find negative that you're cold at points or it's windy. That people make too much noise. I don't know. You could focus on negative things because you can always find it. But there's also so many blessings. No matter what your life is, there are so many amazing things. It's important to not ignore all problems. You've got to recognize problems and work on them. But it's just this identification with them and this obsession with them on the human level, that you are a problem, that you're bad, that you're guilty, that your situation is a problem. Ultimately, it's not. And if you keep fixating on that, it's going to be uncomfortable. And what it's going to create is more seeking in that mental activity to try to improve it. And that's not a good place to invest. You know, I'd invest like 20, 30% of your time in there. And then the rest of the time, I would put the focus on the environment of what's actually happening. And then on your physical situation, your body, your feelings. But I wouldn't put like 90% in the thinking mind. And I wouldn't put 100% in thinking, in the belief that you are found in the mind. That you are a thought. Because that's totally not true and that's totally out of line with reality. And what it's going to do is that you're going to see yourself as a problem constantly. Because that's what the thinking mind does. You're going to think about better things that you can have, ways you're not good enough, which is great. We can all improve ourselves. I'm open for improving myself. It's a good attitude to be open to improvement, to be open to expanding themselves, to get on with others, to be nicer, to work on your conditioning. But it's not a good long-time investment. The long-time investment is to actually focus on what's happening. And this is actually a very intelligent idea that our intelligent minds seem to have overlooked, is that what's happening is always what is. That's what you're left with, is what's happening. You're not left with the thinking mind, you're left with what is. It's always what's happening. You never escape what's happening. So we might as well invest in what's actually happening rather than what we're imagining. Because what we're imagining may or may not happen, may or may not be true. So, in order for that to happen, you first of all have to make friends with your emotions, because your emotions are what's happening. You have to make friends with fear, with anxiety, stress, worry, anxiety. And you have to stop being afraid of it. You have to stop being afraid of your emotions. They're only emotions. They're not so bad. I used to think that fear was... What is this word? This is my dyslexia. Existential. No, where it grows constantly. Exponential. That word? Exponential. So I used to think that it could constantly grow. Like that I could always feel more fear. Then I got to my maximum amount of fear. I had the maximum amount of fear that I could have. And I know you think, well, actually, I'm sure you could have more fear. But this was the maximum amount of fear. It was death. It was the maximum amount of fear I could have. And in amongst that, I thought, well, I can handle that. I mean, it's really not comfortable. And I would really prefer not to experience it. But actually, it's really bearable. If this is the maximum amount of fear I can feel, then it's really okay. Like if I'm faced with the worst possible situation of physical death, it's really an okay feeling. It's not preferable. I would choose other ones, but it's okay. And it's the same for all of you. You can't have more amounts of fear. You can't, there's a limit to it. There's a limit to what your body can experience as fear. Just like there's a limit to what your body can experience of love. It can't go any more. I think what our biggest fear around fear is that it could get so big that we can't handle it anymore. But we can actually. You can actually handle fear. If that's the worst feeling that you imagine having. So you've got to make friends with it. You've got no other choice. It's what's happening. Being victim to it, so saying things like, why do I experience fear? Why is this happening to me? It's just my luck. This is just not going to get you anywhere. It's just going to get more uncomfortable and last longer. So having victim thoughts about it, trying to imagine escaping it. The best thing you can do when you have a very strong emotion is to feel the feeling and feel the emotion. So rather than fighting it in your imagination, put your attention on it. And you'd be surprised what can happen. The seeking to avoid it will just encourage it. God, it's so energetic speaking in front of people. You get to a point where all that energy on you is like, whew. Like my body's going to explode. So the way to settle yourself on the human level is, number one, you have to understand what your body's doing. So understand your emotional body. The chakras is a really good way or clear way to understand it. I didn't learn the chakras and then feel my feelings. I did it the other way around. And afterwards, then I began to look at chakra charts. And when I studied Chinese medicine, I saw how similar they were. Chinese medicine is actually really accurate as well. I'm sure the people that made up these systems made it up after long periods of meditation and exploring their own body. I think that everybody varies. So I slightly vary from the traditional chakra system, but not much. The sexual energy and the trust base energy I find is the opposite for me. And as you understand the emotional body, you'll begin to understand what it is you want, what it is you want from life, what it is you want from your companions, your situation. And everything will begin to become more simpler. As things become more simpler, the seeking energy to avoid this moment will begin to dissipate. You'll be more comfortable in your own skin, which is actually the whole world. It's not your own skin as it ends here, but we'll go on to that another time. So you'll begin to be more comfortable in yourself, which is everything. And you'll stop living in your imagination of who you are, what you want. And then what can happen is there is a seeing that you aren't a limitation. That who you are is infinite possibilities, and is all things. There is nothing outside of you. And that is the total freedom, that realization. That isn't human. That's not a human thing, because you're not human, just appearing as human. Are you human right now? Or does it require a thought to say, I am human? So what are you if you're not a thought? This is not something you can be taught. This is your own investigation. And do not focus too much on being perfect. Being perfect is part of this problem-solving thinking mind. And it's not worthwhile. You'll get sidetracked on trying to be the perfectly enlightened person. And it's really just a power trip. Because if you're perfect, then you're better than other people. If you're imperfect, then you're the same as others. And that human then, Jesus, I can't be better than others when I'm enlightened. It's all about show and tell on that level. So don't get too focused on that part, on the behavior part. You have to kind of accept that you get grumpy. You can be mean, you can be selfish, you can want the last piece of cake, you can like money, you can like sex, you can like naughty sex. You have to accept all these sort of things. You can also like all the other things like spiritual sex, no money, but you have to accept there's a part of you that likes the other stuff too. You just have to accept that at the moment we've evolved from animals, and so whatever an animal is, you are too. We're mammals, we're part of the mammal family, and if you study mammals, you know, got a similarity to the wolves, to the mammoths, the chimpanzees. And so you kind of have to embrace that, and you can only embrace that when you really begin to see that that's not who you are, because it's too difficult when you believe that you are this person, it's too difficult to accept that you can be stingy or that you can be grumpy. That's very difficult. You're like, well, it appears as if I'm stingy, but actually it's that you're greedy. You know, and when you begin to see enlightenment as a human thing, this is when you begin to begins to get mixed, and you get situations like Osho. I love Osho's teaching and I love it. I'm not criticizing Osho as such, but if you watch what happened in the documentary, which is just part of the story, it's not the true story, it always fails these sorts of things. When you begin to see God in a human. The human is a human. It's like imagine the chimpanzees. So you've got the chimpanzees, and then the chimpanzees decide that one of the chimpanzees is Buddha, and they'll do everything Buddha says. It's just not, well, that's hard to imagine, actually. Even for me, who's got a good imagination. Yeah, so this is where, on the human level, you just have to be realistic about humans. And on the human level, we've only got a certain variation of things that we can be. And that really, the reason that you want to find God in a human is because you're seeking for that perfect parent. You're actually seeking for the perfect parent. You're actually seeking for that unconditional motherly or fatherly love in that human. So therefore you imagine that they will be the perfect Buddha, not because of them, not because that's what they actually are, but because you want them to love you unconditionally. But that unconditional love that you seek is yourself. It's found in this moment, and it is the I am. In forms, they will disappoint you. I think we're coming to the end now, which is good because my head's just about to be blown off from all this attention. So it's not the attention as such, it's the energy is all on you for this amount of time. It's a lot of energy for the body to digest. It's like being plugged into 3 electricity sockets, like Thank you for giving me all this energy. I will try and give it back to you all in the next meditation. Or reverse. Okay, thank you very much.